Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a village where the water has swallowed homes, schools, and fields. People are stranded on rooftops, children are crying for food, and families have lost everything they built over generations. Now ask yourself, was this only nature's work, or is there something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Too often when we hear about Pakistan's floods, we are told it's just climate change. Just heavy rains, just bad luck. But the truth is, nothing in today's world is ever that simple. Every crisis has layers, every disaster has hidden hands, and every tragedy carries opportunities for someone else. In this speech, I want to take you on a journey, not of sympathy, but of clarity. Because the real story of these floods is not only about water rising, but about power rising. It is about how global narratives are crafted, how leadership can fail its people, how media shapes our perception, and how aid can sometimes feel more like a chain than a gift. Most importantly, it is about the bigger geopolitical game that very few want to talk about. I promise you, if you listen carefully to the end, you will see the floods of Pakistan not just as a tragedy for one nation, but as a mirror reflecting how the world of power and politics truly operates. This is not about Pakistan alone. It is about how every nation that is vulnerable can be played in the same way. So stay with me, because once you see the real picture, you cannot unsee it. And that understanding will change the way you look at every crisis in the future. When we talk about floods in Pakistan, the first thing most people think about is climate change. Certainly changing weather patterns, rising temperatures, and unpredictable monsoons play a role. But the deeper reality is how climate change itself has become a tool of power in the hands of global players. It is not just about melting glaciers or heavy rainfall. It is about who controls the narrative, who benefits from the disasters, and who decides which countries are labeled as victims and which is responsible. In the case of Pakistan, the world quickly framed its floods as a simple climate tragedy, a natural disaster where the country is seen as helpless. But behind this sympathetic tone lies a subtle manipulation. By repeatedly pushing the narrative of Pakistan being one of the most climate-affected nations, international powers managed to ignore their own role in industrial emissions, geoengineering experiments, and the structural inequalities built into the global system. For European and Western audiences, the story is presented in a way that Pakistan is simply at the mercy of global warming, while conveniently avoiding questions about whether these disasters are intensified by deliberate negligence, policy failures, or even technological interventions that alter weather patterns. Climate engineering, such as cloud seeding, artificial rain, or controlling river flows through mega dams in neighboring regions are topics rarely discussed on international platforms when Pakistan suffers. Instead, the narrative is kept narrow: poor country, extreme climate, humanitarian aid needed. This control framing ensures that Pakistan remains dependent on foreign loans and assistance rather than being empowered to challenge the deeper geopolitical factors behind its vulnerability. At the same time, climate change has been weaponized diplomatically. Powerful nations use environmental concerns to impose restrictions on developing economies, set conditions for financial aid, and extract concessions in trade or security. Pakistan, being in a strategically sensitive region, becomes an easy target for such policies. Each flood, each disaster adds weight to the argument that Pakistan must be helped, but also guided, which in reality means monitored and controlled. The floods are no longer just about rising waters, they are about rising influence, where the same powers who contribute to global emissions appear as saviors in front of the cameras, offering relief while quietly tightening their grip on policy decisions. This is how climate change, beyond its physical reality, becomes a geopolitical instrument. And Pakistan is caught in the middle of this silent but very deliberate game. Pakistan's geography is both its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. The land is blessed with one of the world's largest river systems, the Indus Basin, which sustains agriculture, industry, and millions of lives. Yet the same rivers that feed the fields can, in times of crisis, turn into forces of destruction. Floods in Pakistan are often explained as natural outcomes of heavy rains and melting glaciers. But the story is not that simple. Geography here is not just about physical land. It is about strategic exposure. Every river flowing through Pakistan originates outside its borders, and that creates a dependency on upstream management. If neighboring countries choose to release or hold back water at critical times, Pakistan feels the impact directly. This dependency is not merely environmental, it is political leverage. When floods devastate villages and cities, the discussion usually remains limited to climate change or poor local planning. But the underlying vulnerability lies in how Pakistan's geography makes it exposed to external manipulation. Control of water resources has long been a geopolitical tool. Large dams built upstream or sudden diversions in river flows can amplify flooding risks or create drought-like conditions for a country already struggling with infrastructure gaps and weak governance. This exposure turns every monsoon into a potential disaster. Geography becomes a weapon, whether or not it is openly acknowledged. This vulnerability also highlights Pakistan's internal weaknesses. The irrigation system, though vast, is aging and fragile. Encroachments along riverbanks, lack of flood reservoirs, and poor urban planning add layers of risk. A flood that might have been managed in a stronger system becomes catastrophic in Pakistan. The country's strategic location, often described as a crossroads of South and Central Asia, magnifies the stakes. If instability is triggered by natural or induced disasters, the geopolitical balance in the region shifts. Rivals can exploit humanitarian crises to paint Pakistan as unstable, incapable, and always in need of international supervision. The irony is that geography, which should have been a blessing, is often turned into a pressure point. Pakistan's reliance on its rivers, its dependence on upstream flows, and its vulnerability to both natural and political factors make it uniquely exposed to manipulation. Each flood, each overflow is not just water entering villages. It is a reminder that Pakistan's very lifeline is controlled by forces beyond its borders, and this reality gives adversaries opportunities to exploit instability in ways that extend far beyond environmental concerns. In times of crisis, the real test of leadership is not in words but in preparation and action. Unfortunately, Pakistan's leadership has too often failed this test, particularly during natural disasters like floods. While early warnings were issued by experts about heavy rains and potential flooding, those responsible for governance were more focused on self-promotion and international appearances than on taking preventive measures. The case of Maryam Nawaz illustrates this perfectly. At a time when the nation faced imminent danger from swelling rivers and fragile infrastructure, she was abroad on a tour of Japan, presenting herself on international platforms rather than prioritizing the looming threat at home. This is not just a matter of absence. It is symbolic of a leadership style that prioritizes image building over crisis management. When the floods finally hit, her return to Pakistan was accompanied by carefully staged appearances in flood-affected areas, photographs with victims, and statements of solidarity. But behind these optics, little was done in terms of real relief or long-term solutions. It became clear that the narrative being sold to the public was more about showcasing compassion than actually addressing the suffering. Trucks of aid, media coverage, and orchestrated visits to submerged villages became tools for political branding. Leaders like Mariam Nawaz projected themselves as saviors, but the ground reality remained unchanged. Millions displaced, infrastructure destroyed, and no substantial measures to prevent recurrence in the future. This disconnect between preparation and performance is critical to understand. Floods are not new to Pakistan. They happen with predictable regularity, yet each time the government acts as if it has been caught by surprise. Leadership should mean strengthening dams, clearing waterways, building reservoirs, and establishing rapid response systems. But instead, what the nation sees is leaders arriving after the disaster has struck, using people's suffering as a backdrop for personal promotion. The Japan tour during flood warnings highlighted a troubling reality. When the country needed foresight, its leaders were busy with foreign visits. And when the disaster struck, they shifted gears into spectacle mode. Such behavior erodes public trust. Citizens are not blind to the gap between staged relief efforts and their actual misery. They see promises made on camera, but never delivered in practice. This failure of leadership in times of crisis is not just incompetence. It plays into the larger geopolitical game where weak and distracted leadership makes the country more vulnerable to external pressure and manipulation. Instead of being a shield for its people, leadership becomes another layer of vulnerability. In the aftermath of Pakistan's floods, what often captures attention is not the reality on the ground, but the carefully crafted images broadcasted through media. Cameras follow leaders stepping into muddy waters, distributing food parcels, or consoling victims with dramatic gestures. These visuals dominate headlines and social media, painting a picture of concern and commitment. Yet when one looks beyond the optics, the truth is far less inspiring. The actual systems that should exist to manage such disasters, early warning mechanisms, proper drainage infrastructure, sustainable urban planning, remain either neglected or absent. What emerges is a contrast between what people are shown and what they actually experience. The media becomes a tool not of accountability, but of performance, amplifying staged actions while ignoring deeper failures. This pattern is not unique to Pakistan, but it is particularly damaging in its context. Instead of highlighting the structural issues that make floods so devastating, both local and international media prefer the drama of human suffering and political leaders rushing to the scene. Stories of drowned villages and displaced families create sympathy, but rarely provoke the harder questions. Why does this keep happening? Why are flood defenses never upgraded? Why is planning always reaction? By focusing on emotional storytelling rather than systemic accountability, media coverage shields the leadership from scrutiny. Leaders like Mariam Nawaz, who appear in flood zones with cameras trailing behind, benefit from this dynamic, as their appearances are framed as proof of dedication rather than mere publicity. International media adds another layer to this problem. When reporting on Pakistan, the dominant angle is humanitarian crisis. Images of children wading through water, tents full of displaced families, and aid workers handing out supplies dominate global coverage. Yet, the same outlets rarely discuss how water management upstream, governance failures at home, and economic dependency worsen these disasters. By keeping the frame narrow, they reduce Pakistan to a victim narrative, one that triggers sympathy but not serious inquiry into the power structures that allow such crises to repeat. This suits both local elites who want to appear as heroes and international actors who prefer Pakistan to remain trapped in cycles of aid dependency rather than demanding real structural change. But a result is a culture of performance politics. Citizens watch their leaders on TV standing in floodwaters for the cameras while knowing that the same leaders failed to act before the disaster. This gap between optics and reality leaves people feeling exploited as their suffering becomes a backdrop for publicity rather than a trigger for genuine reform. Media, instead of being a watchdog, becomes complicit in protecting the powerful. Whenever floods strike Pakistan, one of the first responses we hear from the international community is the promise of aid and relief packages. At first glance, this seems like generosity, a helping hand extended to a nation in need. But beneath the surface, this so-called assistance often carries hidden costs. International loans, whether from global financial institutions or powerful countries, are rarely free. They come with strings attached. Policy adjustments, trade concessions, and commitments that tie Pakistan more tightly to external influence. What is presented as humanitarian support often transforms into economic leverage. Floods become opportunities for creditors to expand their control, using Pakistan's vulnerability as a bargaining chip. The cycle is predictable. A disaster strikes, Pakistan appeals for international help, billions are pledged in relief and reconstruction funds, and soon afterward, conditions emerge. These conditions can be subtle, such as pressure to privatize sectors of the economy, reduce subsidies for essential goods, or open markets in ways that benefit foreign companies more than local people. Over time, the accumulation of these obligations weakens Pakistan's economic sovereignty. What began as a natural disaster slowly morphs into an economic trap. The very floods that destroy homes and farmland also create justifications for loans that burden future generations with debt. This pattern reflects a larger geopolitical strategy. By ensuring Pakistan remains dependent on aid during crises, external powers secure influence without direct confrontation. Control does not always come through armies or sanctions. Sometimes it comes through financial dependency. Every major flood becomes a reminder not only of nature's force, but of how vulnerable Pakistan is through manipulation through economic instruments. For ordinary citizens, the consequences are clear. Prices rise, social programs shrink, and development priorities are adjusted not for the benefit of the people, but to satisfy external lenders. Meanwhile, the narrative presented to the world is one of compassion and solidarity. International leaders highlight their aid commitments as proof of goodwill, yet rarely acknowledge how these commitments reinforce long-term dependency. This duality keeps Pakistan locked in a cycle where disasters are never just disasters, they are also opportunities for others to tighten their grip. Aid that should empower recovery instead creates deeper reliance. What looks like support often functions as a subtle form of control, ensuring that Pakistan never truly escapes the economic pressures shaping its future. Floods in Pakistan are often explained as seasonal or natural calamities, but their impact goes far beyond destroyed villages and displaced families. Each flood becomes part of a much larger geopolitical game, where instability in Pakistan serves the interests of those who wish to keep the country weak, distracted, and dependent. When a nation is constantly battling disasters, it struggles to focus on long-term growth, innovation, and self-reliance. Resources that should go into building industries, modernizing infrastructure, or strengthening defense are instead diverted into emergency relief and reconstruction. This repeated cycle prevents Pakistan from achieving the stability and economic independence that could shift regional power balances. External actors understand this dynamic and quietly benefit from it. A vulnerable Pakistan is easier to influence, whether through economic pressure, strategic concessions, or security arrangements. Every time a major flood occurs, narratives of helplessness dominate, and with them come demands for aid, loans, and international supervision. While the public sees images of foreign assistance as acts of generosity, the reality is that they deepen dependence. This is not coincidence, but strategy. A strong, independent Pakistan would be far harder to control, while a Pakistan constantly battling crisis remains pliable. Meanwhile, domestic leadership often plays directly into this script. Instead of preparing in advance or investing in infrastructure that could prevent or minimize damage, leaders engage in showmanship once the disaster has already struck. Visit to flood-hit areas, staged relief efforts, and televised sympathy become political theater, distracting from the absence of genuine solutions. By doing so, they not only fail their own citizens, but also unintentionally reinforce the larger agenda of external powers. A nation divided by internal mismanagement is more exposed to outside manipulation. The bigger picture is clear. Floods are not only about water, they are about power. Every disaster weakens social trust, strains the economy, and forces Pakistan to look outward rather than inward. Rivals and global powers do not need to destabilize Pakistan directly. Nature, combined with poor governance, does the work for them. The outcome is the same: an unstable Pakistan that remains dependent, reactive, and unable to fully harness its potential. This is the hidden geopolitical dimension of the floods, a recurring tragedy that doubles as a tool for shaping Pakistan's role in the global order, keeping it constrained rather than empowered. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have seen, the floods in Pakistan are not merely a story of nature's wrath. They are a reflection of how climate change narratives are used as instruments of power, how geographic itself becomes a vulnerability, how leadership fails in moments of truth, and how media optics often replace reality. We have also uncovered how aid dressed as compassion quietly functions as economic leverage, and how all of this fits into a larger geopolitical game designed to keep Pakistan weakened, distracted, and dependent. This is not just about water overflowing into fields and cities. It is about forces, both internal and external, working to shape the destiny of a nation through crisis. The challenge is to see beyond the optics, to question the narratives, and to recognize that survival depends not on showmanship or foreign dependency, but on building resilience, accountability, and independence. Dependence, thank you for giving your valuable time and attention. I wish you all the strength to think critically, the courage to question what is presented, and the determination to never accept appearances in place of truth. Good luck and thank you.